Welcome, novices and acolytes, to the Sisterhood, presented by DuneNewsNet.com and WhatTheForce. Join us on this meta-mythic journey through the Dune universe.
Welcome, novices, to the Sisterhood. I'm Hannah, your host, and joining me is Marie-Claire Gould from WhatTheForce. Thank you so much for being here.
Hello, everyone.
You can follow the Sisterhood podcast at Podcast Above All across social media platforms, as well as the Dune Newsnet YouTube channel to be notified when the episode drops. You can find me at SheHighSpring on Twitter and Blue Sky. Where can people find you, MC?
I'm mostly known for my Star Wars podcast where we cover Star Wars from a meta-mythical perspective. So you can find that at What the Force, or you can find me on my personal account, Marie C. Gould. Most places, although I'm more on Blue Sky now than anywhere else.
In terms of opening questions, there's a little bit of a time gap between when we see the episode and when we record versus everyone else, because we've been lucky enough to get screeners. Yay, screeners.
Yeah,
But
big
Quarter Brothers.
it has been great. Like, we've been getting the screeners and been able to do our research and give ourselves enough time so we're not rushed so much. But it means that sometimes we're recording and releasing the episodes or getting the episodes ready to go far before anyone actually has seen the episode. So questions and comments sometimes are just hard to answer. So we'll answer them as we see them, which we have had a few of that we've answered on the fly. But we've had great feedback that people have been enjoying this format so far. And we want to thank everyone so much for watching and sharing in their thoughts on what we're doing here, because it is a little bit of a unique style, I think, for Dune as a property.
Definitely, yeah. So we're really grateful for everyone who's joined the conversation with us. And we hope that we'll be able to continue doing so going forward. So yeah, we'll jump right into the archetypes then.
Yeah, so this episode was really unique because we only really got the younger versions of our two main middle-aged women. So we had Tula, of course, and Valya that we focused on throughout the episode. And it's almost like they're two sides of the same coin, which is really cool because there's a cool mythic motif I actually want to talk about as well with this. In that, Tula actually starts out very much balanced maiden. She's just kind of under her parents' thumb. And then as she makes the decision to go and seek out the Atreides, she definitely turns into a bully. And so definitely go back to last episode. We talk a lot about Desmond, and as well as the first episode, being a bully and also a predator. So she does become the thing that is hunting the Atreides, which is really cool throughout the episode. I still have a question about why she made this decision. I don't think we saw that in this episode.
No.
But I think
mean,
that's cool.
Yeah, I had some suspicions, but the way that it went, I wasn't totally expecting. And so I think a lot of that has to do with they're still keeping some elements kind of implied versus explicitly shown to us, which is definitely a really neat way of doing it.
Yeah, and they definitely set us up by having Valia like say like go and do something meaningful or something that you love, and she goes and becomes an assassin basically. That's cool. Of course, Valia is actually mostly a maiden damsel. She's trapped by both kind of the expectations of her parents that she join the sisterhood. She's like, what can I do about it? There's a lot of that idea of passivity in that early life archetype stage, right? So being a passive shadow archetype that she's unwilling to take steps into her own hands. She becomes more balanced with the support of a mentor, who she actually called in the first episode her true mother, Mother Raquella. And she moves towards hero when she is brave enough, essentially, to die for a purpose. I think these episodes are really good at showing archetypical transformation moments, especially hers, because of what happens in the episode. And we'll get to that in a little bit.
this episode is specifically, I think, really cemented for me the fact that I'm really looking forward to when we finish the series and we're kind of able to look back and see the chronological outline of Valya's whole journey from youth into being this middle-aged king now, at least at this point. This like whole life cycle that she goes through. I think being able to see that and the way that it moves is going to be really interesting.
And we could potentially like map their journeys through these things. And
Mhm.
fundamentally, you'll see a transformation of somebody's archetype usually when you see a death and a rebirth symbolically, right? Or that they've decided to fully step into a more responsible archetype uh, through one need or another. Remember, the maiden phase is all about integrating your shadow into yourself. And so with Valia specifically, she has to integrate the fact that the Harkonnens are like shameful to her and they're unwilling to do things. And that symbolically is everywhere in this episode. And it's really great to see, actually. I think how they've played it out in the episode has really been really enjoyable.
Yeah. Now let's talk a bit about some overall kind of mythic motifs for this episode.
Yes. So Joseph Campbell talks about how every woman is a goddess. She just needs to find it within her. And so that means that all women have the power of creation and destruction in them. He likes to talk about Kali, who is sort of this embodiment of both a duality. So it's both Parvati, the goddess of creation, and Kali, her destructive, vengeful sort of alter ego. They're both the same goddess, but they have both life and death in them. So it's a reminder that the mother is anything but domestic. Carl Jung says Kali is thus a paradox. She is the primordial mother who brings forth all life, even while she signifies death. The fear of death, along with the Hindu belief in karma and rebirth, serves as the impetus to be moral. So why I bring this up, this is not a one-time thing with Kali. We have it in actually goddesses that are actually separated. So we have Ereshkigal, Sumerian myth, and Inanna, who descends to go and see her. We have Demeter and her daughter Persephone, who descends to the underworld. Fundamentally, the women have sort of two faces, right? So they have multiple selves within them. And this represents the overwhelming power that women have from a feminine archetype perspective. It shows up in our stories in this way. And so, how Tula's story plays out in this episode is both creation and destruction. So she is very nurturing in the home life. And then she seems like she's in this creation motif with the Atreides. And actually, she has been there to kill everybody, literally destroy everybody that is in the camp, except for one small child. And that's important because she would not do that, or we wouldn't see that archetype happen unless there was a possibility of rebirth. And we see it in the episode, but you and I, as we get to that scene, we're going to talk about what we also speculate might also be going on a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm really glad that you point this out because I think looking at her as this like dual goddess, I think it's probably my favorite part of the episode for a
Mm.
lot of reasons, but we'll get to those.
Yeah,
And
because she is
then
both sitting there in love with the man she is about to kill and his whole family. And that is
yeah,
the complexity of being a woman.
in that main, and we'll talk a little bit more about it as we get into the episode, but that kind of duality, her both loving Orry Atreides and then also having to kill him is essentially the epitome of what I've been talking about and speculating on kind of from the beginning, which is this idea of the bull sacrifice, this purpose of union, death, and new life from that process. But we'll get a lot more into that a little bit
Do
later
you
on. Yeah.
want to know why I brought up Callie? I was thinking about the dual goddess, but specifically, there is an image in the Allura caves of Callie killing a bull.
Really? That's incredible.
And so some of the oldest like bull sacrifice myths out there are related to Hercules, the Minotaur, bull jumping. Like this has been an old powerful symbol of strength. And it ties back to sort of moon symbolism when the goddess was the sun rather than the moon. And things got flipped eventually. But for a really long time, the man was the sacrificial, archetype in story. And he dies so that the world can be transformed and reborn through the woman.
And I kind of talked about this element in Dune in the past on Twitter. I'd done a thread specifically on Dune Part 2. And I think you see the idea of the sun as feminine and the moon as masculine a lot in Dune.
Mhm.
And this episode really doubled down on that, which I think is really cool because it shows a lot about what the House Atreides represents overall within Dune. And I think that the fact that they've been able to keep this kind of motif consistent is one of the strongest points of this show, which I really love from a mythic standpoint.
Joseph Campbell talks about it in relation to the archaeology work of Maria Gambudis and the bull sacrifice, bull jumping that happened in Crete. And you can read more about that in his book, Goddesses. He read it later. Well, it's from his lectures at Sarah Lawrence, and it was later on in his life when he took early on, he would talk about um, women just need to like understand that they are the goddess. Then he actually got to dig into more understanding of goddess stories and how they reveal themselves. And so when we talk about the life archetypes, anytime we use a feminine, again, these are gendered, they're just considered to be internalized, and we use that language for this. Maiden, mother or queen, and crone, any of those feminine ones or the tri-goddess are about consolidating your power into yourself. And that's when the goddess energy reveals, right? Is that you've managed to collect all of the pieces of yourself together to fully have your power and face the outer problems, which are characterized by masculine archetype names.
I think that's a good thing to come back to because the idea of also in terms of the perspective of Tula and Valya is the Atreides are actually their internal struggle because the outer struggle is the corruption of the Imperium, the structure of the Imperium, and the fact that the Harkonnens have been kind of disgraced and discarded and impoverished. But the
Mhm.
internal struggle is dealing with this original sin, this original lie, this deeper shadow, which is the Atreides to the Harkonnens. And so the Atreides, as occupying this unconscious inner world, makes a lot of sense for Dune in a lot of ways throughout the series.
Absolutely. The last thing I do want to mention, because we're going to get into it right away, is the belly of the whale, which is, Joseph Campbell uses it as this is the entrance to the other world or to the underworld. Think about Pinocchio being swallowed by the whale or Jonah being swallowed by the whale. The idea is that you go into the whale itself. The belly symbolizes the womb, it's darkness, it represents death. When the hero emerges finally from the belly of the whale, then they are reborn. There's an obliteration and a transformation that happens when you are within this. And so it's really interesting to see all of the whale symbolism as we get to this first planet. These legends often are closely tied to the theme of self-sacrifice and torment of the flesh. Western cultures will be most familiar with this motif as relation to Christ. So hanging on the cross, him carrying the cross, him being stabbed by Longinus, all of those are considered to be torments of the flesh. And it often occurs in many religious and mythological traditions where people or characters or heroes are killed and dismembered and then have their bodies scattered. And so very shortly after exiting the palace, this is my segue, getting into the episode, we have Valya and Theodosia leave the palace and they say, this isn't the first time I've had an adversary. And then we instantly go to a flashback of Lanky Vale where she is wandering this barren, cold outside. I live in Canada. It looks like right now. But there's these giant furry whale carcasses that have been brought and they're being dissected and dismembered. Every little bit of the whale is being torn apart. This is very much the motif of being broken down in the underworld. And she herself feels like she is being broken down in the underworld. This Harkonnen homeland is the underworld. Let's be clear. It is symbolically frozen, dead, nothing changes. Valya feels it, Tula feels it, everybody feels it. And some people have just decided to be, it's okay, we live here now. And what is the outcome of that? They are the villains of the galaxy. What I said last episode, right? Villains are just heroes stuck in the underworld. They are literally just stuck in the underworld.
It's actually really interesting that you mentioned that, because if you think about Dune and where the Harkonnens are there, they're obviously still stuck within the underworld, and that's spread as they change. They're now on Gedi Prime, and that is this, nothing grows there. There's nothing organic. There's no life there. It's barren and industrial. They continue this pattern. And Valia mentions that, she gets home and her parents are kind of, chastising her. They're very much against this perspective that Valya has, where they think she's ungrateful and too ambitious. And there's a moment where Valya says something like, if we don't change this will affect everyone that comes after us as well. That's exactly
if you ignore the shadow, it grows, right? If you're gonna ignore the problem, it's just gonna grow. What did you think of Polly Walker as her mom, who you may know from Bridgerton as Portia Featherington?
Yes, Portia Featherington.
She plays a terrible mom.
Yes, love Polly Walker. She's incredible. And she also looks a lot like both Jessica, who plays the younger Valya, and Emily, who plays the older Valya. I think they cast her specifically to look like mother and daughter, to look alike.
Yeah.
Which is so interesting because they are so opposed. Which is, I think, another element of something that Valya struggles with later on, which is this idea of having to face her shadow and face this history that she has with the Harkonnens and her background, and the idea of other memory being seeing your foremothers. And even though her mom's alive, this idea of her mom representing this darker side of herself on the inside, this thing that she's
Her dark mother.
Yeah, it's so perfectly cast to represent that. I love it so much. And she's just a fabulous actress in general. She's great.
Get introduced to their brother Griffin as well as their uncle. Yeah, it seems like a nice household. Like they seem to have power, even though they're like in this like very terrible living situation where all you get is whale meat. Your quarter portion of whale meat or whatever it is.
Valya says something like mayor of peasants.
Yeah.
Griffin mentions that the Landsraad has answered their petition or something like that. So I don't know if they have officially the title of Baron yet. But they do have a ruling power and some level of privilege on Lycaville. But actually, I was not expecting them to include Griffin. I know that he's from the books, but I hadn't heard any casting announcements. So when I noticed,
he dies so quick.
True, yeah. But I was like, oh, interesting. They actually included him, which I liked.
I love the name Griffin because it instantly tells us he is the best of them. He is the most royal. He is the most deserving of power and leadership. Griffins are often used, of course, for heraldry to represent royal houses. It was a cool shortcut to say, like, even if he's in the books, cool shortcut to say, this guy's the best of us, and they kill him.
Yeah, and the Harkonnen emblem is often associated with the griffin.
Hmm.
And so I've talked about this in the past, and I'll get more into it later, but there's definitely an element of House Harkonnen being this lion bird or griffin archetype, which is the solar power. When we get into more stuff that has to do with the bull sacrifice. But what I kind of love is that we begin from this perspective of really setting in place the Harkonnens and what they represent archetypically really well just in this opening kind of dinner scene or whatever meal that they're having.
Dinner, yeah. It's just a meal. It could be breakfast, who knows?
Mhm.
But they mention the return of Vorian Atreides, which is this is sort of a deep cut to the novels a
Mhm.
little bit, right? Like, I knew who he was because I've read the Sisterhood book. But did you want to explain who Vorian Atreides
Yeah.
is?
So essentially, Vorian Atreides was, the head of House Atreides. He's a great war hero who helped in the defeat of the thinking machines. And essentially, and I'm not sure how much they're going to go into this. So the gist of it is at some point, he attained basically immortality. And so what he'll do is he'll hang out with his house, his people, his family for a little bit, and then he'll disappear. He'll just go off into the galaxy. And it's just kind of this way of he's often pulled between wanting the connection of home and his family, but then also not wanting to be around to watch them die and stuff because he's going to
Yeah.
live forever. So he comes and he goes quite often, but he's always welcomed by the Imperium because he's this great war hero. And we see that here where he's resurfaced and he's gallivanting around the capital. And, Valya's very hurt by this. And she's like, he's just able to go around doing whatever, whereas we're living in squalor essentially. And so, what she wants her brother to do when he plans to go to the Landsrad is essentially get Vorian to admit that this lie happened, that um, her great grandfather, whatever, Abulard Harkonnen, wasn't a traitor. He was just trying to prevent a genocide or whatever it is that had happened, and basically tell their side of the story in order for them to be welcomed by the Imperium as members who can give back. Because I think she believes that the Harkonnens are able to offer a lot to the Imperium, but they're just being
Mhm.
denied that. And so we don't know what happens when Griffin leaves, but when he does come back, he comes back as a corpse. And all that we know is Valya saying that Vorian Atreides killed him. We don't
Mm.
know how she knows this.
So there could be a misunderstanding there. There could be all sorts of things
Yeah.
we just don't know. Yeah. But part of this is like she kind of gave him the idea, right? Because
Yeah.
he originally is going to go after her, and her mom says she's a wolf. If you're not careful, she'll devour you, which ties back to this idea of like feminine power being both destruction and creation. Ties to the
Mhm.
Ouroboros quite well symbolically if you go back to our first episode and listen to that. But they have this like nice little chat on the edge of a cliff where he reminisces about her saving his life. This is where we find out that she used the voice for the first time and told him to swim even though he had no energy left.
Like, essentially, in this moment, she's both a life death goddess. Her command is what gets him to live, but then also her
Her
demand or
suggestion
her
gets him
suggestion
to
is
die.
what causes
Exactly. So that
him to
dual
die.
goddess is coming forward again. And um, eh, what I find super, super interesting about this is that the voice is connected to 3 times when it's successful to a moist environment.
Mm. The lake or body of water that Griffin was drowning in.
The rain,
Ye
and then when she kills Dorothea.
Yes.
There's
That's
other
really
times
interesting.
it's worked, but, I mean, it's definitely connected to feminine anger, feminine
Mhm.
emotion, right? So, the sisterhood works to control all of that, but it's obviously that rage, power, fear, all of those emotions that are deep underneath the surface, all of that power that can form in the feminine uh, is the power of the voice,
Yeah.
symbolically.
In this scene, it's suggested that they're looking at that body of water that Griffin
Hmm.
drowned in, but it was covered in ice and then he slipped down. And so that's why they bring it up because they're looking at that when it happens. And this is the location that she comes back to later on.
Yes.
Um,
So we get the funeral, sort of everybody blames her, Virgil and Sonia. We find out her parents' names. Thank you. Uh they even say he was the brightest light in their family. And Valya takes Tula aside and says, after this, find something, anything. All that's left here is death and rot. And I'm like, yes, we do know that. Look at it symbolically. Look what's going on. Look at all the dead whale carcass. You're in the underworld. How did you know? Oh, all the signposts? Yeah. Um, and then we cut forward to the modern time where Valya is like reminiscing about everything that's going on. And Michaela approaches and sort of confirms her fear that Desmond is the thing that causes the reckoning with the message and that Lila didn't survive. But actually, lo and behold, we find that Lila is not quite dead in the Princess Bride sense of the world. There's a difference between all dead and mostly dead. We can't deal with. Mostly dead, we can do something. And that's Tula right now. And because she's dealing with this death, we instantly go into her flashback of her on the Atreides homeworld with Orry and her riding romantically across a meadow into a wood and then finding this camp, this hunting camp. And it's interesting because like she instantly goes into like, oh, what if they don't like me? Like I'm your, son's girlfriend, and then instantly goes into domestic tasks because she's one of the only women that we actively see in the camp. What I find super fascinating is this is so standard for you meeting your parents-in-law or your future family is like you instantly go into domestic tasks. You're like, "Can I wash those dishes for you? Can I help you make the table? Set the table?" But that's, like it was utterly fascinating, this entire arc of Tula's. It's so good.
mhm.
We see a young Atreides boy. Did we ever get his name?
I don't think we ever
Curly
got
hair.
his name.
Did you
No,
notice
he's never
that he
named.
has a brace on his leg?
Yes, he does. And they focused on it. It was
Yes,
a
they did.
specific choice.
It was a specific choice. It is kind of a golden color. So he's important and
I'm
he has
thinking,
a leg injury.
yes. So I think the reason why they did that was because they want us to know that, like, we're going to see him when he's an adult in the present day at
Mhm.
some point, and they want us to be able to connect, like, oh, this is that kid from back
Yeah,
then. And it's also, I'm pretty sure, on his left leg,
it is on
which
his
is,
left leg. So that's the Fisher King motif, right?
mhm,
Having a damaged left leg represents sort of a curse on your line, i.e., your manhood is
mhm,
is damaged. You are not fertile. You're not able to reproduce. You're not able to uh, bring your line forward, but also if it's related to the Fisher King, it means that the entire kingdom or your land is cursed as well, which we've already talked about the House of Atreus curse with regards to this in episode 1, especially, which is about the idea of sacrificing the children or sacrificing the future for the present. It ties a lot into sort of modern things that are happening in our world where we don't care about the climate. We only care about money. It's all about greed, all about consumption. The snake not eating its own tail, it's only consuming. Fire burning up people, that's consumption. Or just sacrificing the children, like we had with Pruitt in the first episode. So I found that super interesting because then it went into her inviting him to help her gather the toxins from these little like rodent sort of animals, squirrel, raccoons.
It's the bait for the bull, because basically what this whole event is that Orry's brought Tula to is this sort of Atreides hunting tradition where they hunt this Seleucid bull. And in Dune, the Atreides are associated with bullfighting. And
Mm.
that's kind of a tradition that exists within their house. And here, this is probably an early form of that. I guess they use these animals to lure the bull, but they have to remove the toxins so that the bull doesn't eat the toxin and die, because that would
Die
defeat
right
the
away.
purpose of the hunt.
Exactly, because it defeats the ritualistic aspect of it, of everybody coming together as a community to kill the bull. Orry's best friend, i.e. the horse, has broken his leg, which was a hard scene to watch.
Mhm.
And instead of having to kill him with a knife, we have Tula who goes and runs and gets the toxins and injects it into the horse. And one little syringe, tiny amount of toxins is enough to kill a horse. That is insane. That's why they had to be very careful to remove all those toxins from what they were going to do, because one little sack of toxin probably would have brought down that bull.
I think the guy who plays Orry is really cute.
Oh, he was super cute. Those scenes were
And
great.
the chemistry is so good. And the moment where she's like comforting him after his horse is gone, with like really, you can tell how close they are. And I think it was a good moment too of like establishing how Orry feels about Chula, because she was able to do that for him. Because you could tell that he didn't want to have to use the knife, but he
Mhm.
also understood that they couldn't just do nothing because the horse was in pain. And so she was able to, and he was able to say goodbye to his horse. And it was like, it got me emotional a little bit. I was like, this is really, oh, it was so beautifully done, which makes what happens later just so much more impactful.
It really is. Yeah. She cares about him a lot. But we flash back to Valya's situation where Dorothea has kind of like stepped in for her grandmother, and she's teaching them very the true believer beliefs, and even this commented on that she went away and has come back very extremist in her, you know, dedication to the right way in her mind. It needs to progress.
And specifically, they mentioned that she was like an ambassador or something to the Butlerians. So essentially, this ties back to the Machine Wars, which is also called the Butlerian Jihad. And so essentially, the people that she went to see were the people who were probably the most staunchly strict anti thinking technology. And so this sort of extreme perspective that Dorothea has taken on is coming from very against thinking technology, which is why in the first episode, that kind of passage that she's reciting to everyone is, "Thou shalt not disfigure the soul, and the mind of man is holy."
And it ends up leading them to this sort of showdown between Valya and her out in the rain, where they all have to swear sisterhood above all, which is our episode title, of course. And comes to this crux where she's basically left out in the rain, suffering, she's stuck. And this is something that, we talk about the hero archetype a lot. It's like she's trying to get into the hero archetype, but she's too stuck to do this.
Mhm.
In that she has to collect all of these pieces about herself to be able to transform. She doesn't have everything because she's
Mhm.
too stuck on being a Harkonnen and the baggage, the shadow that she's carrying along with her. So all of this darkness and all of these unresolved hate, anger, vengeance, all of it. So she has to be able to put that all behind her. And also she has to be given purpose. And this is quite common with maiden archetypical characters that need to move into hero. They need to be given a quest. They need to be given
Mhm.
purpose. And so, lo and behold, her true mentor arrives, Mother Raquella, who arrives on a ship. And I'm obsessed with how they look when in the dark and rain when they come off the ship. That was
It's
great.
so cool. clip of it from the trailers that we have in our podcast intro outro thing. It's just such a good scene, the way that she puts her hand out for Valya, and then there's like lightning and torrential rain.
Valya uses the voice on her. And I love this because oftentimes if the crone is struggling with what they have to do, because I think that Raquella falls into that archetype just
Mhm.
because of what she represents. Um, it's often a hero or a young maiden archetype that sort of gives them guidance and gives them the pathway to become a mage. So I think that's really cool in their little tea chat afterwards in her office. Adversity is the key to change. And yeah, unfortunately it is. It is how we grow is growth is unfortunately painful.
Essentially, this scene is Raquella's way of trying to rally Valya, to give her something to reconsider in order to stay with the sisterhood. Present another path for her to go forward.
Flashback to Tula and Orry and all the Atreides guys are having a little dance and they keep on saying Atreides, 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 Atreides as they're dancing around the fire. Instead of being around the fire, Orry is sad. And so she goes and comforts him, and that leads one thing to another. And they end up having sex.
Specifically, after Orry proposes to her,
Yes,
he officially proposes.
he wants to marry her. And so this classifies as an alchemical union, a union of opposites. Specifically, we know as the audience, little does he know yet, she is a Harkonnen, he is an Atreides. These are enemies who are becoming lovers, even through a lie. But this is important because when you have this sort of union of unconscious opposites, and specifically our POV is Tula. She is having a union with her opposite. It allows for the transformation in herself to become something more than she was before. Even in the fact that she is both making love amidst the death, that is also a layer to what is happening. And this is where we get to the coniento, pronouncing it wrong, but it is the outcome of alchemical union, of the union of opposites, which is a child. And so this comes to our speculation that Tula might be pregnant.
Yes. I feel like I was mostly kind of right. The only part I think I got wrong was I thought that little trinket that she gave to Lila was going to be from a bull, was from her brother. But everything else I got right. I think was pretty spot on. I was expecting some sort of, at least symbolic death. I wasn't thinking we were going to get literal death.
It is important because it represents symbolic rebirth, right? So
Mhm.
these two opposites have created a new future. I'm just wondering who this kid is. Is it Kieran Atreides?
I still think it's Kieran.
I lean toward Kieran as well because I think that it says something really cool symbolically if the kind of progenitor of the modern Atreides line so long ago was actually a Harkonnen and an Atreides originally.
Yeah. An ongoing theme within Dune that even though the Atreides and the Harkonnens are so opposed to each other, they're really not all that different. And honestly, they're the same thing. And there's all of these different elements, like Paul is tested for his humanity through the box test. And there's all these elements of comparing the Harkonnens to being less than human, more animalistic. When the Atreides be heralded as this pinnacle of humanity, but then Paul is a Harkonnen. They're no different. The head of House Atreides is also a Harkonnen. I think the reason why this is so impactful also is because if the future of her bloodline through her sister and the future of the Atreides bloodline is the same thing, the shadow that she has to reckon with within the Atreides,
Is her own shadow.
yeah,
Yeah.
which
We talked about a little bit. I don't know if it was actually on recording or not, but we've talked about how the Harkonnens are just the Atreides shadow, and that
Mhm.
they are just the darkness that they do not want to deal with, because we only typically see the Atreides as the point of view characters for
Mhm.
the story. And so the best way to deal with that is through love, through marriage, through reconciliation, not through
Mhm.
destruction.
And like in this way where the perspective is now shifted where we're coming at it from the Harkonnens,
Mhm.
we see the same thing where the Atreides are their shadow. Like it's the same thing just from this slightly different perspective. And I think it's really important to kind of remember that they really are the same thing.
This moment in the tent is specifically considered to be a lap of the goddess moment. So the best lap of
Mhm.
the goddess moments I like to call out is Avatar: The Last Airbender, when they go to the beach episode. The old ladies call it like rough edges are smooth. It's domestic bliss. Specifically, this is the lap of the goddess refers to Kali and Shiva, actually, or Parvati and Shiva in Lingam Yoni connection. Them having sex, being in the lap of the goddesses having sex, right? So, but it actually refers to this period of rest where you can rest and literally like be directionless, aimless, without struggle, just feel at home for a moment. But oftentimes, from a dramatic tension perspective, it is used as the rest that the audience needs from a storytelling perspective or from a narrative perspective before the destruction happens in the story or something really hard happens. Um, Narratively, it's always a choice to be like, let's give the audience a little bit of a break, something fun, and then destruction. Um,
Mhm.
eh, which is what happens in this moment. He is resting in the lap of the goddess, and everything is destroyed, and she is also destroyed and reborn in the making of this situation.
Mhm. In the morning, they wake up and Bree's just kind of like super happy and like, great, on to the day.
And everyone's gonna be so happy that you're joining the family. And she's like, I regret everything that
Yeah,
just happened.
everything.
I'm so sorry.
And it's interesting because she's still convinced that he's going to hate her. And
Mhm.
I think after the union that they have, she almost needs him to hate her because that will make it easier. But what happens is she tells him that she's been lied to him and her last name isn't actually Vale, which is actually a very interesting choice for a last name.
Yeah.
Um, but it's Harkonnen. She is a Harkonnen. And Orry's response is, oh, I don't blame you for wanting to keep your last name a secret, but also we don't choose who we're born to. And basically, he doesn't care. And he's like, that was their problem a long time ago during war times. If the previous generations want to keep this going, that's on them, but we don't have to continue this feud.
He's like, why is
And
it so
she's
quiet
consistent.
though?
Yeah. And
She's like, you
she
didn't
didn't think.
see me. Oh, you didn't see me. What?
The night before they have sex, she says something about how, like, even her family had never seen her. And then he says, but I see you. And then in the morning, this moment, she's like, you didn't see me.
You didn't see me.
And so he goes out,
Stuff that they had been eating slash drinking and
putting all over
had
themselves.
had the toxin in it. It killed all of them. And so she pulls him close in an embrace in almost like a Pieta type situation, stabs him with the needle, kills him, holds him in her arms in the, like pity.
Looking into his eyes.
Yeah, the way Mary Magdalene holds Christ. But then poor little baby Atreides comes around the corner and she sets him
She tells him to
free.
go.
Just leave, which is symbolically this golden child that has been released
Mhm.
from the destruction, although we still think she's pregnant
Yeah.
because that's not
It's
Jared.
no. Um, it's like I think it goes hand in hand because if I had to assume, this kid's gonna be like the current head of House Atreides. I would assume that he raises Kieran, so in that way they're connected because he is the salvation in the future for Kieran in that case.
Mhm.
So it just all kind of connects in that moment. But then Tula kind of looks up, and then on this cliff is the bull. And
Mhm.
this moment reminded me of in House of the Dragon, in that one episode where they're going hunting for the white stag.
Mhm.
And, you know, Rhaenyra goes on this kind of side quest inner thing that she has to do. And then she has a very similar moment where the big thing has happened to her. She kills a wild pig, and then she just looks over, and then there's the white stag, which is also a representation of like the ruling house of Westeros.
Mhm.
But this is essentially confirming, without a doubt, that what has just happened here is the bull sacrifice. This entire retreat has been about a bull sacrifice. The bull is the Atreides is the bull. The bull is a lunar figure. The horns, kind of make that crescent moon shape. And it dies to be resurrected. Like that's the point of the ritual. And so
Mhm.
in ritual bull sacrifices, the point is for like the bull to symbolically be resurrected. And this is essentially what they're doing with this hunt. You can't have new life without old death. And this is practiced in Egypt, Mesopotamia, among the Greeks. And in India, the bull is associated with Shiva, which is also interesting that you mentioned already about Bavardi and Shiva. It's
Mhm.
so perfect. And so the primary sacrifice is also often the king or a young princely figure. This is already seen in Dune with Duke Leto. And
Happens in the myth of the Minotaur. The young children are sent to Minos to be fed to the Minotaur as part of
and
tribute.
the subjects of the sacrifice has to be perfect. If anyone has a flaw, they were deemed unworthy of being sacrificed, which is why this sacrificial figure was often the king. And that's essentially what Orry is. He is the next in line to rule House
Mhm.
Atreides. He's handsome, he's kind, he's perfect in understanding. And so he is this sacrificial figure. And this idea of union and ritual death is seen in a lot of different cultures. There's the legend of the maiden Hina. She's associated with the moon and death and resurrection. So in this myth, this girl, she likes to go bathe in this certain pool. And there's this eel that always comes to visit her and brush up against her thigh. And then one day he turns into a young man and they become lovers. And then he'll go away and then he'll come back. But eventually one day he comes and he says, "Next time I come visit you, you must kill me, cut off my head and bury my head." And she does this. And from that grows a coconut tree. And then um, she picks the coconut tree, and the coconut basically looks like a human head. It has like the eyes and all of that. And so it's this idea of from death, new life. And this is also commonly seen in the Isis and Osiris myth, where he dies, and then from the death, she conceives their son Horus.
He's actually dismembered, and she has to go and find all of the different pieces of him, and she has to remember who he is to be able to have Horus with him.
We might see that. I think at some point, Tula may want to reconnect with her son. And so through doing that, she'll have to remember Orry, come to terms with what happened, and
Mhm.
then go to seek out Kieran for that.
If he is who we think he is.
Is if he is.
So we go back to Valya, who is gotten to know Raquella quite well and has sort of learning from her. And Raquella brings her into my life's great work, which
Mhm.
is, of course, the genetic library that is underneath the school, way underground. Valya, she's sort of bragging to her friends in like the cone of silence.
It's important to mention that Raquella also mentions that they are using forbidden technology
Ah,
for
so she
this.
does tell her, yes, and shows her,
Mhm.
yeah. But Thalia wants to be given an opportunity and trust. And so she's in on it. And she's coming along. Like, I would say that she's actually growing in ways that she hadn't grown in a lot of ways. Like, her voice is growing, which is this big indication of her internalized power. She manages to get her friends to slap each other and is surprised it works so well. But this seems to concern Raquella because Dorothea is gaining followers. Valya's got her besties. And so she pulls them together into the lab where everybody can watch and says, it's time for you to do the agony, friends. You need to be humbled. But in some ways, this was just a way for her to truly commit to something and also have an opportunity that if this is something that she really wants, she has to go and deal with her baggage, right? The shadow is often classified as your baggage or this garbage bag that you drag behind you that's smelly and you don't want to deal with it. But to take a step forward into a new life, into a transformational moment, into a new you, you have to deal with the garbage that you're carrying around with you. You have to put it in its right place. And so this agony test is an opportunity for Raquella to push Valya to go and deal with her family, which is her baggage that she's carrying around, her own shadow. And so she returns with word from her sister Tula that she is also returning. Raquella doesn't give her a choice. She says, go and come back if you're a reverend mother. And she gives her the poison.
She's essentially saying, come back as a reverend mother, don't come back at all. This is really that turning point. And Valya is in a place where she doesn't want to see her family. She doesn't want to have to go back there. But if she doesn't come back as a reverend mother, then she has to stay there. So she's being put in this position where she has no other option. She has to deal with her baggage. She has to deal with her shit.
Transform or die.
So she gets home, and the first thing that she does when she gets home is she goes to visit Tula at their brother's grave. Again, Lankavel, the underworld, and everything that she does when she's on this planet is somehow related to death, which is really interesting. Basically, Tula tells her about what she had to do. You know, Orry and Atreides, he's gone again, and they're kind of using this as like a message in a way, I think. A way of making a stand, getting some sort of revenge for their brother. But obviously, this was a really hard decision for Tula to follow through with. And Valya tells her she didn't think she was going to be able to do it. And Tula agreed.
How that decision came about for Tula. Like, she went off. Maybe she ran into him and it was opportunistic. He approached her.
I think probably he approached her, but I also think it was Valya who essentially told her to do it. Because there was this like code thing that Tula had sent Valya, I think probably Tula had ran into Orry, and Tula had mentioned that she'd come into contact with an Atreides, and then Valya probably was like, this is an opportunity for us. And then Tula, being loyal to her sister and wanting to avenge her brother, was on board with that, but then wasn't expecting the amount of feeling that she was going to have for Orry. And so they go home, and her parents are very livid.
Yes.
Her mom is basically saying that, you know, she put her sister in a lot of danger because they could come after Tula specifically for revenge for what happened, because this does more to ruin the Harkonnen name. And this just puts them in a really hard spot. And they're basically like saying, oh, poor Tula, our sweet child that we were also ignoring previously. And just how Valya is essentially like, she uses the voice on her mom. And I was like,
cool moment. Yeah.
I was wondering if she was actually going to make her mom do it. Because every other time she said, use it. But it makes sense that she didn't. And so she leaves and she goes out into the snow, and she's on that cliff after it goes down where she talked with her brother. She takes out the syringe, and with her mom, that was her kind of facing off against her dark mother. And then she just lets out this rageful scream when she takes the poison that didn't feel like it was pain. It was anger.
Yeah.
That came out in that moment, which is really cool.
So she's doing the agony in this barren wasteland. The last time that she had seen her brother was probably there. And yeah, it's just absolutely wild scene. And so she's suffering, and but Tula comes across her and calls to her. Basically, like this reminded me so much of there's probably some dual goddess symbolism in here to do with Rishkagal and Inanna, but um it just reminded me of Frozen a little bit, like maybe it was the frozen landscape, but the fact that love brought her back from being dead, from being frozen forever. And she awakens and she's in Tula's arms. Again, tying back to, life and death that Tula represents in this episode.
Mhm. And I think that this is also something that in the previous episode, Valya was telling Tula to get Lila to undergo the Agony. And she said that if you guide her, she'll be able to do it. You've done it before. I think she was talking about like how she was able to pull
Herself, yeah.
through it.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a nice kind of connection there. And they have this like really sweet moment where like Tula like kisses her on the forehead and she's like, I'm coming with you when you go back to the Sisterhood and I'm not going to lose you. Yeah, it was a really good moment.
It's going to be a fresh start.
Mhm.
And then we go back to saying goodbye to Lila, and Tula is very sad, obviously, and everybody says goodbye. It's like a nice moment. Um, but that's not the case.
Jen kind of calls that out. Emmeline's like, she's with her foremothers now and she's, in the infinite. And then Jen's like, all of this is bullshit. Like, you
Yeah.
pushed her to do this. And then Mother Elvira, she essentially says something along the lines of Lila deserves respect because she underwent this. And even though she didn't survive, the fact that she endured this and is now passing over to be with her foremothers is a process that deserves respect. And every sister who undergoes this, whether they survive or not, deserves the respect. And also, she says that Tula deserves respect. She's the one who has to go through the whole process of taking care of her now that they're saying goodbye. Having to go into the underworld isn't easy work. And for our own selves, when we're going through this process of facing our shadow and uncovering a lot of stuff that's weighing on us, trauma and fear, it's not an easy process. And the people around us can see that, I think. How we handle that in our own lives is going to be different for everyone. And it's not always going to be a seamless process.
Darkness and shadows and stuff. Yeah. I've heard from a lot of fans over the years that, the way that I talk mythologically about the underworld and the darkness that characters go through and presenting it like, you're just in the underworld temporarily as part of your journey. And only if you get stuck there is kind of that, the problem. Often resonates with people who have had depression or addiction because, or have had family problems or their own darkness that they have to work through because it's very real. And oftentimes we need fiction to be able to give ourselves a lens to this because it's not something that we can look at directly into ourselves. But when we see something in a fictional story that resonates in this way with us, it means that we're dealing with something that we haven't had an opportunity to dissect, dismember, pull apart so that we can rebuild.
Yeah. And then kind of through this moment, Valya and Theodosia are going to this building and Theodosia isn't sure where they're going. And then we find that they're going through these apartments. They're in this elevator and then the doors open. We see Harrow Harkonnen, the Baron of House Harkonnen, and he welcomes his Aunt Valya.
She says sacrifices must be made, sisterhood above all, which I loved. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. And he also
And
says, how's Aunt Tula doing? In the weirdest way. Okay, so I still think that Tula is Kieran's mom, but there's an offhanded chance that I'm like, okay, he's the bearer and her kid.
It makes less
Wait.
sense because also, if he was saying it weird, that would suggest that he knows that she's his mom, in which case, why would he bother even saying aunt at all
We need a paternity test on these kids.
in the back of this room in front of this fireplace? Got some sort of like respirator thing.
Is it a floaty chair?
Yeah, and he did a floaty chair.
So
Very,
so
very,
so Harkonnen.
very Harkonnen. Um, and that's kind of uh where we ended with Valya. She's approaching her family, and we know from the first episode that she's been refusing to send them truth stare. She's really severed herself from House Harkonnen. And now she's turning and coming home.
Yep.
The prodigal daughter.
And I think that, we talked about last episode that we totally expect Francesca to make an appearance. I absolutely think she's going to be in the next episode. It's
Yeah.
just what's going to happen. And then we cut back to Tula, who kind of has this moment of like, oh, cleaning up everything. It's super awkward. But actually, what she does is she goes deeper and deeper. She goes deeper into the earth where the ancient knowledge is. And she is going to go and save her little girl.
We see that Lila's in sort of this spice apparatus thing. It kind of reminded me of a Bacta tank from Star
Mhm.
Wars a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
And Tula's communicating with an AI.
Its name is Anarul. That was cool.
Yeah. And she's basically instructing this AI to save Lila. And that's where we end the episode. Are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it's very poignant that she goes all the way down into the lowest point to resurrect her, basically. And also using the spice is very symbolic of, you know, transformation method. But I think that we're going to have to see Lila actually fight in the unconscious part of herself against the
Yeah.
other voices and the foremothers.
A little bit of it kind of reminded me in a way of Demeter and Persephone
Mm-hmm.
with the daughter in the underworld and the mother wanting to fight to get her back.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens next episode. I'm thinking probably the stuff with Lila, her being in the underworld will be wrapped up in the next episode.
Yeah.
And then we'll be like full speed ahead kind of towards the rest of that arc.
We're halfway done.
Yeah. Only 6 episodes this season.
I mean, it's
I-
better to have 6 solid episodes than too many or whatever. I'd rather them tell a complete story if possible.
And it feels, I'm curious what the climax of this season is going to be specifically, because they have so many pieces going all at once. But yeah, so I'm looking forward to where we go next. So talking about the alchemical journey and kind of where we sit now at the end of this episode, we've moved through disillusion and out of the phase of Negredo into the phase of Albedo, or whiteness, which is kind of the phase where you start to have clarity and see all the pieces that make up the whole. It's a process of purification, and you're able to more clearly see the different parts of yourself. And so the first stage of this phase is separation, which is kind of highlighting your internal struggle. And we see that through Valya and Tula's brother dying, where they're separated in that way. Valya and Tula are then separated when Valya has to go to the Sisterhood and Tula has to embark on her own kind of journey. And then when Valya has to then leave the Sisterhood and return home in order to do some more inner work, and you're kind of looking for, as you're separating these things, what in their purest form is giving you life-giving quality. What is a driving force for you? What is the truth behind the trials that you are facing? And through this kind of process of separation, we move into conjunction. And Valya and Tula are reunited. Valya is then successful in the Agony. And so she's now taken on this new mission for the Sisterhood. And so in one episode, I would say we've completed the phase of Albedo. and moved through separation and conjunction. And we're mainly looking at this from the flashback standpoint, because uh, that's the predominant amount of this episode. But I think in a way, this is also something that they've gone through in the present to a certain degree anyway. Valya's been considering things. She's been reminiscing on the past. She's been learning, like, okay, so we now know that Desmond is this thing that Raquella was concerned about. And now, okay, now I need to go see my family. I need to go see the Harkonnens. This is a new approach that we need to make. And you can see she has some of her confidence back near the end of the episode. She's going to see her family, but she's not like nervous or concerned about it. She feels like her old self again in a way. But what do you think, MC?
Yeah, I think so. Sometimes you have to see where they end up in the next episode because they could linger a little bit with resolution of some pieces. But yeah, we'll see next episode. This was a really amazing episode. I feel like the show is picking up steam. Like the second episode felt way more solid than the first. This felt so good. Even though it was mostly flashbacks, and sometimes that can land weird for a story. But I think that giving us a lot of Valya and Tula as the main characters and the main POVs as sort of two sides of the same coin. We dealt with a lot of dual goddess symbolism in Acolyte in Star Wars recently, and I'm going to think a lot more about how these two sisters are connected in that way as we go further on in the season.
Yeah. I think flashback episodes don't always land with me, but I didn't feel that here. And I think that's because we did get a little bit of the present day, but also where they are in present day feels very connected to where they were in the past. Like Valya, in the past, she was trying to separate from her Harkonnen roots and find her
Instead,
own
now she's
identity.
coming back.
And now she's coming back.
Yeah.
And Tula, her in the past, was having to kill and say goodbye to something that she loved. And in the present, she's holding on to and trying to save something that she loves. And so we kind of see where they were in the past and how that's affected how they approach the decisions that they're making in the present, very interconnectedly, which I think is very effective, and makes this a really, really great episode to kind of move us on into this second half of the season. So yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah, I guess that's it. If you want to follow us on social media, you can follow us at Podcast Above All on Blue Sky, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find me at She Had a Spring on Twitter and Blue Sky. And where can people find you, MC?
On Twitter, although I don't post that much there anymore. I'm mostly on Blue Sky.
And make sure to follow the Dune Newsnet YouTube channel for whenever our next episode drop, and comment all of your thoughts on this episode. And let's keep this conversation going.
Thank you, everyone. Sisterhood above all.
We hope you've enjoyed your visit to the Sisterhood. Remember to like and subscribe so you know when the next episode drops. Stay tuned to DuneNewsNet.com and follow us at Podcast Above All on Instagram, X, and Blue Sky.